We've got Gary. So we still need one more counselor anyways. We will need to wait for Counselor Lehman before we can have a quorum.
Okay.
We've got Gary. So we still need one more counselor anyways. We will need to wait for Counselor Lehman before.
Well, the recording works. So for everybody that's watching, we are waiting to start the meeting. We're waiting for another counselor, so we have a quorum. And as usual, technical difficulties. This would be part of the reason why broadband would be considered an infrastructure project. Can't get any work done.
I am in contact with Counselor Lehman and Counselor Alexander, and they're both saying that their connection is slow and it's taking a long time to boot up, but they are both trying. We do not have a quorum. I think we should start.
Councilor McConnell, did you have a question?
I was just going to say, I could not get in on my city iPad, and so I'm on my phone. So I don't know if there's something going on, but I couldn't get in on my iPad tonight.
Yeah, I'm concerned because you just hesitated and stopped while you were having that conversation. Not you, but the
Oh.
feed.
Okay. So, looks like there's Marcus Alexander. So as soon as we get him there, great.
Hey,
We have a
Councilor
quorum.
Alexander. Okay, I'm going to start this meeting of the Coburg City Council for April 13th, 2021. It is now 7:05. I have a little bit to read here, so stand by. During the COVID-19 global pandemic, the city of Coburg will be hosting their meetings via webinar. To watch the live stream of the meeting, go to coburgoregon.org. No registration is required. To participate in public comment portions of a meeting, you must contact the city recorder to register at sammyegbert.com, cicoburg.org.us, or call her at City Hall. This meeting is being held by webinar with audio and video recording. To participate in this meeting, you must have registered with the city prior to the meeting. Presenters and members of the public, please mute your microphone and shut off your cameras at this time. When called on to speak or provide a presentation, unmute yourself and you may turn your cameras on. This is important because we get a lot of echo and some technical quality problems. So try and keep the feed down as much as we can. During the public presentations and public comment portions of the meeting, participants may raise their virtual hand to be recognized if not signed up to speak. I will also do this if I'm watching. If this meeting is disrupted, we will recess for 5 minutes and return. If that does not correct the issue, the meeting will end and be rescheduled. Sammy, are you ready with the Pledge of Allegiance? And remember everybody to mute during the Pledge of Allegiance. I know it takes Sammy a second because the allegiance won't stay on cue and she has to hunt it every time to bring it up.
Oh, wait, share sound. And I am.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So is it back to the regular screen?
Yes, it is. And if we could do a roll call. I'm sorry, my screen went flickering on me. I was scared I lost it.
Okay, so we have Mayor Smith, Counselor Alexander, Counselor Bell, Counselor Fox, I've seen Counselor Lehman, and Counselor McConnell are present. Absent is Counselor Blaine. We do have a quorum.
Sammy? So I want to remind counselors and any other appointed or elected official that may be listening that the statement of economic interest report is due Thursday, the 15th. For those of you that haven't done this, it's very important that you do. It's Oregon revised statute requirement for all elected and certain appointed officials. We have had a history of a person being fined for not doing this. So please get on that. It is your obligation to complete that as per state law. It's going to be a busy spring. We've already scheduled some work sessions. We have the budget committee meetings coming up, and I've asked Sammy to make sure that we get our Outlook reminders a little bit in advance. This does create kind of a mess because she sends the Outlook reminder so that we can put it on our calendar, but then when she sends the Zoom link, it gives us another calendar reminder. Now, as I was telling her, that gives me 3 of them because I usually put my own reminder on the calendar too, but I would prefer that she gets these out to us. I'd rather have too many of them than none of them. So just be aware that that may double up or triple up depending on what we have to do with the calendar reminder and then the Zoom link. Again, I just want to thank the counselors and our committee members and stuff. Lots of things going on, lots of work going on. The staff is really trying to keep up on things. We do have a budget process coming up, and that's going to throw 2 or 3 meetings into our calendar. So a busy spring, and at least we have good things down the road. Sammy, do we have agenda review items? Anything to change or add?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Okay, do we have any citizen testimony?
We do have Dale Cast. Dale, if you want to turn your video back on and unmute yourself.
Welcome, Dale.
Hi, everyone. Am I- can you hear me?
Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, hi, everyone. Do I need to say my address and location, all that kind of stuff?
Please do.
Okay, my name is Dale Cast, owner of Cast Construction. I live at 32687 East Locust here in Coburg. And I just have a couple questions for you guys tonight about the alley on North Miller Street. I think it's in your packet. I have the 2 lots there on North Miller at East McKinsey, and I'm building 2 new houses there. I have clients that are purchasing the houses from me. And I was explaining the lots to them in the alley there. And their question, and it's just a question, do they have any option of being able to use the alley to access the back of their properties if they so desired, to possibly someday build a second garage or build an ADU or something? It's just a possibility they just wanted to ask about. And if that wasn't an option, there's currently 2 encroachments. There's one encroachment that I think you guys see. It's at 32803. It's a fence that's in the middle of the alley or close to the middle of the alley. And the other one is at 32811 East Lincoln Street. They have a garage or a storage shed that's encroached in the alley and a swing set and stuff in the alley. So they're in the way to ever be able to use the alley. So that's a question that they have. The second question, if that doesn't work at all, could they work with the criteria of the city to vacate the alley? And if they vacated the alley, if that went through the proper paperwork and got it all submitted, there's actually 5 neighbors that are on the alley. There's one more person besides my 2 lots. Those 2 lots I just mentioned, there's one more lot at 32878 that butts the back of the alley also. If all 5 of us went together and vacated the alley, what do we do about the encroachment that's more than halfway into the alley? So my understanding with Brian is the city might be open to, Brian Harmon, the city might be open to us vacating it because it doesn't go anywhere. It's a dead end alley. If they are open to vacating it and we fill out the correct paperwork, 1 or 2 of the pieces of property encroach more than halfway into the alley. And what do we do about that? Then the third question would be, if you guys say neither one is acceptable, one of the encroachments is 9 feet into the alley, and that's 3 feet from my back property line, which according, if I'm correct, which hard telling if I'm 100% correct, is that's a fire code violation that you can't be that close to there. What do we do about that? Those are just the questions that we have. Just questions. What do we do? That's about it.
Thank you, Dale. We will be addressing this as a specific issue, item number 4 on our agenda. So it'll be a bit. I will say that those are good questions, and those are things that the council needs to give direction to staff. We're going to take some legal input on it. We do have some written input and a city attorney available for us to discuss this further down the agenda. So good questions. You're probably aware, but I'm certainly aware that Coburg is notorious for this issue. We've actually had streets and stuff that we did not have easements for that we've discovered throughout the years. And so it continues.
Yeah.
And
I
think
had one more thing that I could
we'll have some
mention.
direction.
Sammy actually lives, she knows, she lives at 32803. Her and I have talked a little bit about it. The other neighbor at 32811, I haven't been able to communicate with them, but if we could just move their garage back out of the alley or get further back, I'm willing to bring my crew over and and cut it back, whatever, pave to cut it back. I don't want to put any financial burden on anybody. I just want to, for everybody's sake, we just want to move it back at least on their property or at least past the 5 feet. What I think is the fire code. I'm not trying to inflict any cost on them. I'm willing to pay to do it, to help them out. So I'm willing to do that. I haven't been able to communicate that with them though.
Okay, we certainly appreciate that. And again, Dale will be talking with our legal tonight, and council should be giving direction on that. And I'm sure this is not just a one night, we'll cure everything. This will be an ongoing issue that we're going to determine. But staff is looking for council direction on this tonight, and we should be able to give them something.
Excellent. Hey, thanks everyone for volunteering and being on this, and that's about it. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you
everyone.
very much, Dale. Appreciate
Okay.
your input.
Okay,
Good night.
bye.
Okay, let's see. Consent agenda. Well, first of all, let me go back. Is there any responses from Counselor on the citizen input?
I thought he asked good questions, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that we have a little bit later.
Very much so. Okay, now we'll move forward to the consent agenda. Councilors may remove an item from the consent agenda for discussion by requesting such action prior to consideration. The consent agenda contains the minutes for the February 23rd, 2021 Council and Planning Joint Work Session and the minutes for the March 9th, 2021 City Council. Is there any request now to remove any of these items from the consent agenda? Keeping in mind, we can make amendments without doing that. Councilor Lehman.
I don't know if it's removing it, but either an addition to the minutes, something I felt was stated that wasn't reflected in the minutes.
We can make amendments without, and yeah, we can make amendments and keep it in the consent agenda, but if you want to separate it and have
Whichever
serious
you
discussion,
prefer.
then we can do that. But we've made amendments before without removing it from the consent agenda.
Whichever way you'd like
So-
to do it. There was just a statement that was made that I think should be reflected in the minutes. Can you hear
Let's
me?
go ahead and just amend it.
Okay, so on page 9, Councilor Lehman asked that the minutes be corrected, and there was some discussion afterwards, and I'd like to have what Councilor Fox stated added to the minutes, where he said that he felt it was very important that the minutes be accurate. And there was some other comments by other councilors around the need for accuracy in the minutes.
Okay, Councilor Lehman, so if we're gonna amend these minutes, we have a couple options here, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Okay.
We're gonna amend the minutes. I need the exact amendment that you're recommending that goes to council. If you're asking that we go back and review the recordings and add more information to these minutes, it will not be able to be approved at tonight's agenda. And that should have been something we did before it came to the council meeting. Those are the options.
So it's your choice, Councilor Lehman. If you have a specific wording that you would like to add to this, and we can approve it tonight. Otherwise, we can remove it and go back.
I'll withdraw it.
Any other comments or questions on this from councilors? I will say that I certainly agree with the statements and the concern that Councilor Lehman brings up, and so does staff. I'll just say that we had a disappointing time with our minutes and minutes takers that really became an issue for us, and it was obvious with those minutes that this discussion brought up. So hopefully that has been taken care of. And we certainly all agree that we want the discussion and the points that lead us to decisions to be in our minutes and to be accurate. So whether or not it's in these minutes, it's certainly an intention of this council and the staff to do that. And I'm sure never has been anything but. Is that okay with you, Councilor Lehman?
Yes.
Okay. Any other concerns or questions, corrections on the consent agenda? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion by Councilor Bell and a second by Councilor Fox to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please wave your hand in front of the camera. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. It passes unanimously. We have no special guests. Ordinances and resolutions. Resolution 2021-05, a resolution accepting grant funding award from Travel Oregon's Destination Ready program. And is that Megan or Ann? I got to switch back and forth here.
It's Megan tonight. Good evening, counselors.
Thank you, Megan.
Before you tonight, there is a resolution to accept the award funding from Travel Oregon's Destination Ready program. This opportunity opened up in February and was a very quick 2-week turnaround. Staff was able to submit an application and the city was awarded $11,700 for the development of a bike hub in Coburg. The bike hub will be located in Pavilion Park on the North Harrison side of the park. A final design has not been approved yet, but we are thinking it will look similar to the other park structures and will be very compatible with the architecture in town, probably something similar to the structure in Johnny Diamond Park. Amenities will include a fix-it station, which is pretty much a pole with some tools on it, lockers, a water fountain, and a solar charging station, which will also improve our community resiliency. And we're hoping that construction will be complete in August. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Alexander, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah. What, as far as design, what steps are being made to make sure that this is being used by the correct people?
A lot of the initial designs that we're looking at are from other bike hub examples. So there's quite a few in the Gorge region, which is some of the examples that we've been looking at. We'll take this to the Park and Tree Committee. And we've had just some other best practices looking at other bike hubs.
So as far as safety for people's bikes or themselves, is there thought being put in for that?
Do you mean safety to access the structure or well?
No. Well,
Or-
bikes get stolen in this town, so I want to make sure nobody's bikes get stolen, because if they're using a kiosk, they probably have a pretty nice bike.
Sure. Well,
Out of town, I don't want the liability on our city for someone pilfering.
As far as I know, we will provide racks for them to be locked up, but the liability has not been discussed. But that's a great question.
And then also the charging station, how is that going to be? I guess I'm concerned that this is going to be a hub for something other than bikes.
Well, the charging station will be available in the park, and it's designed for cyclists, but it is available for public use. So
I guess I'll just have to wait to see design. For me, it seems a little open and can be used for other things and maybe discourage people who really do want to use it. For bicycles, especially those who go on long bicycle rides and have those $5,000 to $10,000 bicycles, and just putting it on a rack in the middle of a park, you're not going to get me to put my bike on there. So I'm trying to figure out, as far as design and what thought is being put into the security, and also to make it poignantly a bike kiosk instead of a hangout.
I will answer to some of that, Marcus, Councilor Alexander, that is a concern, and I know the Parks and Tree Committee has those questions. One of the elements of it is the visibility and where it's placed, so that it's visible from many aspects. Because you talk with these bicycle owners that ride these bikes, and again, it's nothing to have a $10,000 bike, and so the visibility to be able to lock it up, see it when you go over to an eating establishment or to shop in the retail shops is important, but also visibility for many people to see instead of hiding it away in a corner. The charging stations and stuff like that is a question that comes up, and I think that's going to be a serious discussion with the Parks Committee when they look at it. And I know almost every person I've talked to about that question comes up. Obviously, it's going to be something that I think Chief Larson needs to be in that discussion, which he's part of that, is part of that discussion. I see Councilor Fox raising his hand, and then Councilor Lehman.
I've seen some in Eugene where my favorite chain link is used. So it's visible, but it's totally secure, and a very narrow thing where it can either be horizontally placed and occupy more space, or vertically placed and it holds it in place. And then it's a cage door and you lock the cage door. So that would be the visible security. Not aesthetically lovely, but the charging station is a very good point. We should really talk about that, because I worked at an office that had an outdoor post that had electricity on it. We'd have board meetings in the evening, and some people that did not have homes used that to charge their phones, and we would have to step around them after board meetings. And so, we have to, that's a well-founded discussion.
Councilor Lehman.
Two thoughts. For security, perhaps the SCRAM program could be extended to this, where there's actually a camera in place, monitoring and surveillance. And number two, I was just wondering if the grant will fully cover the infrastructure cost, or is the city going to also be contributing funds for it?
The city has secured another fund through the Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization. It's a regional fund for a bicycle enhancement project. So with the combination of the two funding sources, the city will not be contributing any cash.
Thank you.
Councilor Alexander.
But could that fund be used for something further? In other words, could it be figured out to be able to do this within one grant instead of using two?
Both grants were approved specifically for the development of the bike.
Kiosk. Okay.
I just want to correct, the city does have a small match. It's very small, but they do require 10.27% on the MPO grant. So it's 3,000 and something. It's a minor. It could probably be fulfilled possibly with in-kind donation of our public works team working on this job. So
thank you, Anne. I apologize for that.
Any other questions from councilors? Without further discussion, I would entertain a motion. Councillor McConnell,
I just want to read it so I get it right. I move to approve Resolution 2021-05, a resolution accepting the grant funding award from Travel Oregon's Destination Ready program.
and Councillor Fox.
Second.
There's a motion by Councillor McConnell and a second by Councillor Fox to approve Resolution 2021-05, a resolution accepting grant funding awards from Travel Oregon's Destination Ready program. All those in favor, please signify aye. Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It passes unanimously. And I want to assure the councilors, I see Councillor McConnell, I want to assure the councilors that it is going to the Parks and Recs Department, and I'm sure they will vet all these concerns and questions and come up with something as a recommendation to deal with this. Councillor McConnell.
I would just like to recommend that if you have an interest in the type of locking, whatever they're called, recommendations that you make that aware to the Parks and Rec or Parks and Trees Committee. I know my husband is an avid biker with an expensive bike, and he has a lot of thoughts on it too. So Councillor Alexander, I would really strongly recommend that you make some recommendations on how to make it safe and what type of structure it should be. I think that'd be great.
Okay, Councillor Lehman.
I would just oppose any kind of a chain link fence around it. I think that would just be unsightly.
And I agree with that, and especially because we want to put it in the center, in the heart of our city. That is going to be a big concern, as Councillor Fox related to. Chain link is just not quite it. I'm sure we could find something else to contain and still look nice. But Megan and Councillor McConnell is the liaison to the committee, so I'm sure you can carry our concerns forward, and I know those concerns are already there. I've had discussions with some of them, and I think it's a good project if we do it right.
Thank you.
Okay, we have vacation procedure.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. Sammy or Megan, did you want to pull up the slides or?
So everybody, this is Henry, our planner for the city. He's going to give us a presentation regarding possible vacation or considerations of the alley.
Thank you, Sammy. You can go to the next slide, please. All right, so I'll give a brief background of the issue here. So the alley in question is shown by the red line. The alley in question first was recorded in 1902 on Coleman's second addition to Coburg. The recitals on the plat indicate the alley was dedicated to the public. The alley presently consists of grasses and no pavement. And the status of utility lines underneath the alley is unknown. It appears fences and other small accessory structures may encroach into the alley, and from what staff were told, this likely goes back 20 years or more. Staff have been informed that the alley is not free and clear of obstructions, and it would likely be difficult for a person to travel from one end to the other. The present issue was brought to the city's attention when an adjacent property owner inquired about development of the alley, as it seems to have been allowed in the past. Next slide, please. More background on the alley. The alley in question is, This is a picture that was provided to staff. This is one of the fences in question that appears to be protruding into the alleyway. And again, it's likely been this way for many years. And the precise location of the fence in relation to the alleyway is unknown. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some considerations outlined in the memo. The purpose of the memo and this presentation is informational only. Staff are only looking for direction as to the questions posed. The purpose of the alley and its interest to the city is unknown, as is what, if any, legal development can occur within the alley. We also do not know the precise boundary of the alley or how far the fences or structures protrude into it. Answers to these questions require further investigation. The alley located between the block immediately to the west is free and open of obstructions. The alley located immediately to the east enters into Hayden Homes and offers access to several homes. The connection to the Hayden Home subdivision with the alley in question is presently blocked by a fence and flower beds, but it appears that the fence and flower bed have been built in a manner which would permit them future connection with minor alterations. This picture was included in your memo as Exhibit 4. Public Works generally supports the vacation of alleyways because most of them no longer serve their intended purpose and they would no longer have to maintain them. A vacation of an alleyway turns over ownership of the alley to adjacent property owners whom would now be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the alley. The questions/options that I pose to you tonight, option 1 is whether or not the city should vacate the alley in question. If this is pursued, staff would also like direction as to whether or not the city should look at other alleys in Coburg that need to be vacated. If vacation is pursued, that can occur by 2 methods. Either the city council take up that issue on its own or by petition of adjoining property owners. Option 2 is to direct us to investigate further into having those fences and other structures removed from the alley in question. Option 3 is related to option 1, to look at alleys elsewhere in the city. And there's also another option that could just happen tonight at your direction. That's all I have prepared tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Maybe go back to the slide 2, Megan, just showing the area in question.
Do any counselors have any questions? Counselor Lehman.
I was withholding my hand for a little bit because if other counselors had questions, I didn't want to always be the first to jump in. Generally, I would support the vacation of the alley, but I think that it should not be a gift to the new owners. That one way of compensating the city for the value of the property would be to look at what the tax assessment value of the land is and figure out what that would be as a square footage cost, and then assign that cost to the new owners. But this would only be feasible and workable if all, I guess, 5 owners agreed to do that. I don't think we can vacate just a partial portion of the alley. It should be the entire alley. I think it would be very important to know what the width and length and square footage of the total portion of the alley is. It would seem like there should be some investigation. There has to be some platting or survey done back in 1902 to determine that, or since then. But I think if we simply vacate the property and give it to the new owners, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them, without compensation, would set a bad precedent. It could be a criticism. It could be considered favoritism to one or more of the owners. And what Henry said is that there are answers that these questions that need further investigation. I think there should be an investigation before a decision's reached. We shouldn't be making a decision without those answers being provided. And if staff feels there's no current or future utilitarian or infrastructure need for this, then I would say if we don't need it, then we should allow the new property owners to assume them. I would guess that they would have to take legal steps to incorporate that into their existing deed, because they will be part of their new taxable lot. And the fact that there may be utilities underneath that are unknown is something that I think should be discovered. Certainly wouldn't want to vacate a property that had utilities that were in use. Maybe they're old utilities that are no longer in use, but that question needs to be answered too.
Okay, I have Counselor McConnell, then Bell, then Fox.
So I'm looking at exhibit 1, item 4. The two red lines, is that where you think the potential boundary is?
That is a very crude map just to show you the general location of the alley. Like I said, the precise boundaries of the alley are
It's
unknown,
unknown.
and I would recommend to be surveyed, which is likely what would happen.
Okay, then a follow-up question. At the end, going into Hayden Homes, you said that it was access to some of the Hayden Homes. Is it actual access that they can now access, or is it, how do they access it, and what could they access it with? Is it just walking, or is it a
Yeah,
vehicle?
it'd just be walking. It'd just be a
Pedestrian, okay.
yeah, pedestrian.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I
Okay.
said, if you were to walk from the left to the or through that alley, you would eventually hit Hayden Homes. But there's a fence there right now in the flower bed. But it looks like that can be removed to make that connection.
Okay.
Looks like it was built in that manner.
And then
Counselor, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The third question is the biggest concern I see is that home, which is on 32001 Lincoln Way, it looks like there's two buildings that might be in the alley. Is that, given that it's a really general diagram of what the alley is, that would be one of my biggest concerns, is that looks like that would be a major consideration for them because there's two buildings on there. That's it. Thank you.
Counselor Fox.
If it's okay, Mayor, I will go ahead in turn. This is Counselor Bell.
I'm sorry.
I have no problem. I honestly have a problem with vacating any more alleys within this city. I remember in the past, in the not too distant past, a conversation occurring that council previously had vacated an alley and then determined that it was needed for our public works people, and we had no recourse. So I think we really have to be very cautious in terms of vacating. I do think, again, we need to look at a whole bunch of alleys and figure out what are we going to use them for, or do we just vacate them? But I do have concerns.
Yeah, I would
Okay, Councilor
echo Councilor Bell's concerns. If we're going to vacate, I'm sorry to hear that there's a precedent already. I thought this was going to be setting a precedent, but I would love to vacate my alley and stop the cars from going down it. The kids go down it every night. And the alley across the street could be easily vacated because it's used for firewood and they grow plants in it. It's lovely. But I think it's a slippery slope that we're headed down. And I don't know anything about utilities and alleys because I don't see any, but there could be something buried. And I think a lot of some phone lines go down the alleys. But I'd be very cautious about this. It's one for all for one, or, the hodgepodge of vacating this one, it's starting to set a weird precedent.
Well, I'm going to also agree with Councilor Bell. There's some significant history of vacating some city right-of-ways that created problems. This one's certainly pretty confined and boxed in, and I don't think creates that kind of an issue. And I can understand Public Works concern about having this piece of property and being responsible for maintaining it. And so thus wanting to vacate. But I think we need to know a lot more information, and I think we need to set up a policy about how we're going to determine whether we're going to vacate these right-of-ways or continue to maintain them. And one of the issues is, if we're going to keep them, we should probably be maintaining them, and they aren't being maintained, as Councilor Fox can attest to on the alley behind his place. I'm very familiar with that one. You know, the old days, there used to be the fire trucks needed to get back there. And I can tell you, I'm not speaking for the Coburg Fire District, but personally, after 31 years of firefighting, as a company officer in charge of a $500,000 apparatus and 3 souls on board, I would never drive a fire truck down any of those alleys to try and fight a fire. It's like driving into a wood stove. It doesn't make sense anymore. So there's a lot of issues that we need to address to look at this. And I think number one is truly delineating, which means surveying, which costs money. Then transferring that land over, and that's more money. And I agree with Councilor Lehman that if these property owners do want this property, I think they should pay not an exorbitant amount, but pay something. But there's an issue with that. When the railroad right-of-ways throughout the city were given up, they were put up for sale, and the property owner abutting that property, of course, had first choice. And then if they chose not to buy it, then somebody else bought it. And I can think of a couple of disagreements and issues that were created with that when somebody else bought that property and created issues. So there's a whole can of worms in this that we need to really look at to make sure that what we do is going to be the right thing for the city and the property owners. Ann?
I just wanted to make it clear that the reason we haven't surveyed this is because there's a cost to that. And if the council were to say tonight, we're not interested in vacating it, then that's a cost that we don't need to spend. So that's why we're making sure that we know your direction prior to spending that money. I also think it's important that we hear from Brian on this issue, because he is the one that maintains the alley and he's familiar with them. And I think that he does have some expertise and some opinion on these alleyways. And so I would hope that we could hear from him on this issue.
I see Councilor Lehman raising his hand, but is it okay if we let Brian speak? Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so just quickly, most of the east-west alley systems do not contain any city-owned facilities, such as utilities. The north-south alleys, the ones that get traveled quite a bit, do have utilities in them. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. And most of those north-south alleys are the only alleys that have residential access. So I can think of a couple different residents that their homes front an alley. But most of the east-west alleys are, as Councilor Fox knows, hard to get down. And Public Works doesn't necessarily go out and look at alleys on a regular basis. It's maintained by complaint, I guess you would say. So if somebody says, hey, this alley needs to be cleaned up, then we drop what we're doing and we go clean up the alley. But I am, I can tell you that I am strongly in favor of alleys that serve no use to the public, that were platted in 1902 before vehicle traffic was even a thing. Most of those alleys were installed for people to access the back of their home with some sort of buggy and cart to, you know, unload whatever feed for their animals or things like that. Most people are not accessing the rear of their property through those alleyways. That's all.
Councillor Lehman.
I would just say that if we do not vacate the alleys, I would agree with Mr. Cass that if there is a fire violation of being a structure within 3 feet of the property line, that should be addressed. Just in the future event, if there were some fire or damage done, that was a substantial cause for it, and the city was aware of it and didn't enforce the statute, it could come back and be a liability for us.
Gary Darnielle.
Yes, I'd like to make one point and slightly diverge from the staff report. Not all right-of-ways are created equally. Some are easements to the public, and when those are vacated, in those cases, the property automatically goes back to adjacent property owners. But in cases where the public, i.e. the city, own them in fee, then the city council, like the railroad, has to take an additional step to transfer the property to the adjacent property owners or sell them. So in this case, my understanding from what Henry said was that both the streets and the alleys in the plat were dedicated to the public, which means they have the same legal status. And I'm kind of thinking that's in fee, so that technically the city owns the right of way. And if they vacated them, they'd have to make a decision of how to disperse the property. That's all.
Thank you, Gary. So I see the issues that I think we need to address is the setback and encroachment violations. Whether there's vital access, the easements and right-of-way issues, and the easements for utilities. You know, I know that I have phone lines and we all have sewer easement on our property. So if there is a utility in these right-of-ways, I don't think that necessarily stops us from vacating it, because that easement would still be there for that utility is my assumption. And maybe Gary could answer that. And then just the determination of putting an inventory together and making a policy of which ones that we want to vacate and which ones we should keep and maintain. Gary, do you have a question to utilities that are in something that we would vacate?
I think you can differentiate when you do the vacation, and especially if they're under separate easements, which they usually are.
Okay, that's what I thought. Any other questions from Councillor? Councillor Alexander?
I'm trying to make sense of Exhibit 1 and Exhibit 4 because they look different. So I guess I'm not seeing it right. Exhibit 1.
Exhibit 4 is if you were standing in Hayden Home subdivision looking at the alley. It's blocked by the fence and the flower bed.
So where is that structure in Exhibit 1?
Exhibit 1.
That structure.
Yep. Exhibit. It's on tax lot 700. It's 32803 East Lincoln Way. It's the first property you would walk into in that alley.
So but you see what I mean? You don't see that structure the same way as Exhibit 4 shows.
No, they're opposite ends of the alley. The Exhibit 4 is just to show you what the other side of the alley looks like, and it's presently blocked. So you
Right.
cannot walk through it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm still trying to figure out where that roof is reaching across in Exhibit 1. I see a bush in Exhibit 1, goes pretty much full length of one property. Then I see a couple small structures sticking slightly into the alley. And then 700 looks like maybe a fence and slight structure. But in Exhibit 4, it's almost looks like a whole house.
Sure, it may be. Like I said, the only information that was passed to me was we knew of a fence. We had a picture of a fence, and it was likely there were some other structures that were protruding in there.
Okay.
So, yeah. So what you're seeing is likely one of those other structures that were identified, but we don't have a picture of.
Yeah, and it might be just an illusion because it looks like it's a lot more in the alley than the topical view by far.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, you could not pass through the alley. It's obstructed.
No.
To what extent, we don't know.
Okay.
Counselor Fox.
I was just wondering, did staff go out and look at this whole situation?
Someone I did not, someone at the city did and reported back to me what they found.
Because I see the house too. It looks really odd.
Megan and I walked out. We did photograph from all sides. Obviously, there is a fence in the alley, and there are structures over into the alley, a garage, and possibly a whole hedge is in the alley. So if you see the laurel hedge, that is probably in the alley. I just think it's the, Counselor Alexander, I think it's the way we took the picture. It makes the building look like it's a much bigger, big building into the alley, but in reality, I think it's just the angle to which the photograph was taken.
Could it be that the fence next to the flowers is actually the alley to the right of the flowers?
Like I said, unknown. It hasn't been surveyed. We don't know the precise boundaries of the alley or the intrusions into the alley. So,
okay, thank you.
Counselor Lehman.
I'm just making the assumption, but that fence was probably built by Hayden Village during the construction of that project.
like, yeah, it's probably right. Yeah.
I think the house in question may be Sammy Egbert's behind Hayden Homes.
Well, I think the
No.
page 28.
Oh, snow water.
That's looking east. At the west end of the alley, looking east. I can zoom in and you can see the hedges clear in the back that have been topped off. And you can also see the graded soil on the property to the north where Dale Cast is building. And so this is looking east in page 28. And if you go to page 29, it appears to be the same location, only they moved slightly south for whatever reason, because you can still see the graded soil there. So you're still looking east.
Okay, then it looks like it's actually the two panels of fence, half of the flowers, and then to the right of the flowers with the two flowers sitting there. That looks like, as far as, yeah, it looks like it'd probably be the area. So it doesn't even really go into the street. It goes right across that person's property, I
Yeah,
guess.
and so if you look at the one with the flowers from the Hayden Home side, you can see the hedge has been topped right at the fence there on page 30.
Yeah.
So that's looking west from the Hayden Homes development.
So what
If
is
that
the
helps you get some
pathway?
perspective.
What is that pathway? Is that someone's home back there, or is that a pathway that anyone can access from the flowers?
That's the access. It's an alley access to garages in the backs of the houses.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
If
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
looking
yeah,
at the
that's the road
flower
that-
box,
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
there's an
That's the
alley
street that has
access.
the-
The middle block had alley access for garages in the back of the house.
That's right. Got it.
And so they actually use that and drive back there. And I see Brian. Go ahead, Brian. And then Councilor Alexander.
Henry, correct me if I'm wrong, but the alley on Exhibit 4, that's not actually a public alley. That's a private alley, correct?
I don't know if it's public or private. It doesn't seem to appear dedicated right away. Yeah, I thought it looked a little odd when I looked at the aerial map. It just looks like an alley. I don't know if it's public or private, but it doesn't appear to be dedicated right away.
Yeah, we don't have any maintenance requirements on that back alley. So technically, it doesn't really matter. The alley from west to east ends at that fence.
That's right.
Councilor Alexander.
Brian, what is that post that's in the middle of the alley? If you can look on exhibit, page 28 or exhibit 4. Post.
Yeah, I see that. That's probably a private light post.
Yeah, it looks like a light post.
But the private one, most likely.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, exhibit
seemed-
4 looks like a light post just to the west of the Hayden Homes development. Councilor Fox, you had a comment?
It just, from the photograph, it looks like somebody had it surveyed because there's paint on the ground and there's one of those pegs with a little flag on it and a tie line.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't know who did that, but I noticed that as well. I don't know precisely what they're trying to show there, but yeah, it looks like something happened out there. I don't know if that was Public Works or some private individual.
That could have been Dale.
Yeah, it may
It,
been
it was not Public Works.
not Public Works. There you go.
No, sir.
I suspect it was Dale getting his corner pins. Okay, I guess we could look at pictures all night long, but right now what we need to do is give staff direction on what we would like to do with this. And again, I have my notes. I would like to see setback violations and potential remedies for those. We need to find what alleys do create an actual exclusive or vital access to the properties. And we need to determine, as Gary was talking about, the easements versus right-of-way and what that means as far as our decision to vacate and how that would be distributed or passed on to somebody else. Does anybody else have other items? Councilor Lehman.
So what I heard was that we could vacate the alley but maintain an easement.
I believe, and from what Gary said, I believe we could vacate it, but the utility easements would still be there. Just again, just like our sewer easements for every one of our properties is there. I believe we could vacate, but we would have to pay considerable attention to those easements and what they do. Right, Gary?
Correct. Yes.
Councilor Fox.
And if it was vacated, we'd have to develop a procedure for how to auction or sell off the alley.
I think that's an important part because the past has created problems for us because we didn't have a policy or how to deal with this. I think we do need to have a policy to look at how we vacate our properties and what kind of requirements there are or issues that we should look at before vacating.
sounds good.
So at this point, do we want, again, like Ann said, this can run into some money. We go around surveying all these properties and things. It starts adding money. Plus, it puts one more burden on our public works people and others to look at these and determine where we go. Do we want this in depth where we are looking at a true inventory of these alleys and surveying, or do we want to just look at the policy aspect of it right now? And do we want to focus on this one piece right now because of the ongoing development? Lots of questions, I know. Councilor Raymond. You just muted yourself.
I think we should just look at this one issue for now, but I think it would be important for the council to see how many alleys we have without surveying them, but just simply a listing of them and maybe an overhead map, just so we know how big the issue is. Because I don't know if there's 5 alleys or 20 alleys.
Show of hands, anybody that disagrees with that? Anybody disagree with that? Please raise your hand. So we would focus on the current one that we're deliberating because of the development going on, and then get just an overview of the others. And I see Councilor Fox. Go ahead, Councilor Fox.
Well, I was going to suggest, I like, was it Mr. Cast's idea of moving the fence back, which would neutralize some of the issue and the concerns. Because if we move forward with this, it's, you know, I like the idea of shared alleys, but there could be some contentious points.
Well, I think it's certainly generous of Mr. Cast to volunteer to assist with moving those buildings back. But yes, they can be contentious. And again, I have some history knowing that people had garages built over property lines and they had to be torn down, and other structures also in Coburg here because nobody paid attention to property lines. We're pretty prone to that. I saw Councilor McConnell raise her hand, and then Councilor Fox.
My issue with expecting Mr. Cast to do that portion, not really knowing what our final decision is, that's looking at that map. There's 2 big buildings that he would have to move, and that's a burden that we're asking him. I mean, I know he's volunteered to do it, but that I would think he would want something more definite than, well, we're kind of going to think about, you know, what we're going to do, but we really don't know. So I wouldn't think we would want to require that.
Well, we certainly, the city certainly would not be a part of that. If he wanted to help with that, we would be just notifying the property owners that they're in violation of setbacks. And if Mr. Cast and the property owner wanted to get together, that's fine. And he said he would do that. But the city's not going to move that forward. I see Ann and then Councilor Lehman.
I think it's really important to note that this particular alley, the encroachments into the alley have been in place for many years. This hasn't happened in the last 5 years or 10 years. We're talking over 20 years. And I think that there could be, and this is a question for Gary, legal ramifications that those property owners could come back at the city because I'm just questioning whether there is any legal ramifications for the city because we allowed this and now we're telling them to move it.
Legally, as long as the city owns the property, has fee, there's no suit for adverse possession that can be brought against a local government. So they couldn't sue the city if the city chose to make them comply with the right of way. It's really a political.
So at this
issue.
point, if we focus, yeah, I see Councilor Lehman, but I'd like to make the comment that at this point, it looks like we want to pay attention to the specific alley that was presented here by Mr. Cast and staff, and pay attention to that. And I think we need to get some details, especially those buildings that encroach, and look at, you know, do we have utilities or any issues in there, and come up with a couple of options. And it sounds like Brian is in favor of vacating this land, and we need to look at that. And if once we find the details of, probably going to have to survey and figure out where the property is so that we can look at these buildings and issue some setback complaints or demands or whatever we have to do to look at these buildings. And then if the property owners want to negotiate how to do that with Mr. Cast or anybody else, that's fine, but they'd have to meet the city's requirements. Councilor Lehman.
I think we should reach out to the 5 property owners in question and simply pose the question to them that if the city council were to vote in favor of vacating, would they be interested in purchasing the property based on some criteria related to property tax assessment value on a square footage basis? Because if just one says no, I think that shuts the door for vacating. I don't think we want to partially vacate an alley in a right of way.
I agree completely with that. I think, you know, it's certainly worth looking at to contact these property owners and see what their wishes would be, and get that input and then make a decision from there. Councilor Bell.
Quickly, can we at the same time ask staff to look for some policies about vacating? I'm sure other cities must have vacation policies, and I think that can move us forward both with this property and for questions that come up in the future, because there will be others.
I think our staff is very good at polite plagiarism. Most cities are more than willing to share what they've already learned. So absolutely. Gary.
I would point out that the development code does have 4 general criteria that the city council has to consider when they're looking at a vacation. I don't think they're nearly complete. I think we've talked about a number of issues that we would want to add in any inquiry as to whether to vacate some property, though.
Development code. I need to write that down. Any other questions, statements? Henry, Ann, Gary, I see Henry writing a lot. Do you have enough information to move forward, or do you need clarity?
I think I do. It sounds like we should investigate the particulars of that alley, find out what's there, find out the dimensions, and see how far those fences or structures are encroaching into the alley. I think we need to do that. And then the investigation into the broader policies with respect to vacations. And it was also mentioned just a basic map showing other alleys in the city, how many you have, essentially. And then Mr. Mayor, you brought up easement versus right. That's something that we can also look into. And the compensation involved in that.
And the other part is that encroachment issue. How can we address that with the owners that have encroached upon it, if they have? How would we deal with that? Is that good for council? Council got anything else, Councilor Lehman?
Well, in addition to contacting the 5 property owners to see what their interest is, if we do know that they have a structure that encroaches on the property, I think we should provide notice to that fact and at least put them on notice that we are aware of it and looking at issues of resolving it.
Yeah, and I think that's what we were just discussing with Henry, is to look at that, see how we deal with that encroachment. Okay. Ann, do you have anything else to add to this before we move on?
No, I think we have good direction.
Okay. It's a good point, and it's interesting how this just has gone on for decades. I'm sure Gary probably remembers a few of these. The railroad right-of-way was really something in the city when they left that. They vacated that right-of-way, and in some aspects it was a free-for-all. In others, it was really good that people were able to add on to their properties. And I think if we do it right here, we can make good, just like the railroad right-of-way did. Moving forward, the Parks and Tree Advisory Committee bylaw amendment. Is that you, Brian?
I believe Sammy's going to take the lead on this one.
Okay.
Unmute and. Hey, thanks, guys. So Parks and Tree Committee reviewed their bylaws. This happened back in September. Made some recommended changes. Those changes have been, they're attached in a track version, so you can see what changes they're recommending. The next step they're asking for is for City Council to approve the amended bylaws or approve the bylaws as amended. Once that's done, then they'll go back to the committee with Brian on the 20th, I believe.
I see Councilor Bell, and then Councilor Fox, and then Councilor McConnell.
The only, and Councilor McConnell is probably going to say this, and maybe Dr.
He's the liaison. So.
Yeah, and perhaps Councilor Fox also. But on Article 4 membership, they had strike one non-voting council member. And if you read all of their recent communication, they have taken that off because now City Council has a liaison to that committee. So that was the only thing I was going to bring up.
Councilor Fox, and then Councilor McConnell.
Yeah, I thought that was curious, and I thought there might have been a disconnect or a time lapse. Mine actually was focusing on the minutes because they have a minutes section that talks about reviewing, editing, and updating the minutes, but they don't mention taking minutes or that they have to be taken. So I think if you're going to have a minutes section, you should start by taking the minutes. Appointing someone, you know, I think that's a good idea, but.
Right, so Councilor Fox, I can answer that. The city provides minutes recorders to all committees at this point through Lane Council of Government. So it's not part of the city's roles and responsibilities to take the minutes. Like used to be, there was a secretary or somebody who was actually part of the committee that was responsible for that. We quit that about 2 years ago. A lot of the stuff, part of council direction at the retreat was that they wanted us to work on getting our committee goals and our charter and everything consistent. So each one of these individual committees were not separate. These were such minor changes that we didn't get into the details of correcting those minutes now, as we're looking at more of the big project that's going to flush all of those little things out. But we'll talk about the minutes recorders being provided by.
So that doesn't need to be referenced in these minutes,
It's going to be a citywide it is a citywide policy that the minutes are taken at the committee.
Okay, okay.
And that's really what we're looking at, is to provide an umbrella for many things, including the appointment of committee members at a city level versus putting it all in the committee level and then having multiple ways that we do things in each of the committees.
That was my only point.
And Councilor McConnell, and then I see Brian. You're muted. Councilor McConnell, you're muted.
Patty, we can't hear you.
Sorry. You answered, the one question was answered about my being at the meetings. I guess it's still okay for me to go then. But the other part, Councillor Fox addressed part of that as far as the minutes of the meeting, and is it also the responsibility of the city now to inform about the meeting schedules and dates and all that, or is that something that the committee needs to have someone doing?
That's something that the city currently has been managing.
Okay, okay, so that,
There's
okay,
a
that
staff, a city staff lead that coordinates all of that and gets them on the calendar and works with me. We provide the public notice for them, retain all of the paper and the electronic records, and then notice them, make sure the minutes are signed and filed, so.
okay, all right, those are my two questions. Thank you.
Brian?
I just wanted to address Article 4, the membership. They're striking this, if I recall, because it's a council liaison now and not an actual member of the committee. And these, like Sammy stated before, these were something that were drafted in September. And I think that was kind of prior to the actual appointment of liaisons and that whole conversation. But that's why we did talk about liaisons in September, if I remember right. And before, when these bylaws were drafted, the council member was actually part of the membership of the committee.
Okay, thank you.
And that was a big part of our retreat, if you recall, the discussion about members versus a liaison. And a liaison is appointed through the council to whatever issue, whether it's a committee or another outside group or agency, versus a bylaw that mandates that a councilor is a member. And so we wanted to move away from that bylaw requirement of a council member. And Councillor Bell, you had a question?
Well, I was just going to point out that on page 128, that is like the second page of the minutes from the Parks and Tree Committee, and it addresses that. So if everybody had looked at that, maybe we would have answered our own questions.
128. Good job.
Councillor Lehman.
I'm just struck by the fact that the purpose of the Parks and Tree Committee is limited to organizing fundraising events and promoting donations. I thought they did a lot more.
They do a lot more. And again, we're looking at an overall staff, and I have been really trying to work on a larger umbrella of policy and bylaw templates to make it more uniform throughout the city committees, and really trying to take what the council does and take it down to the committee level. And Sammy, go ahead.
Yeah, and I also wanted to know, so the bylaws really set out their meeting structure, how they vote, that kind of stuff. Park and Tree Committee also operate under, I believe there's 3 different ordinances that delegate their work. And so their tasks are much, and an ordinance is going to be a stronger document than a bylaw, but they're tasked with a lot more than just that.
So many of our committees actually have an ordinance that created a task and created that committee because of a grant or funding or something that was brought into the city, and they oversee that. And Parks and Tree Committee, part of it is the $2 tree fee. The ordinance states that there will be a committee that oversees how that is spent and creates a tree plan. There's also a couple of other ordinances, as Sammy said, that dictate to the Parks Committee some tasks.
And our city master plan actually also refers to our Parks and Tree Committee for tasks. So.
Councilor McConnell?
I would just like to add that having been participated in a couple of meetings now so far, I'm really impressed. They have very organized meetings. They are handled very professionally and they get a lot done. So just from my perspective, good meetings.
They get a lot done, and yesterday I saw them getting a lot more done. They put a work party together, and I saw 4 of them working out by the Johnny Diamond Park, weeding and cleaning up. And I've participated in many of those work parties. So they don't just meet, they get things done. And I think our committees are all really picking up and going forward and being progressive with their actions and making things better here. Is there anybody else with comments or questions on the bylaws for the Parks and Tree Committee? If not, I would accept a motion.
Well, I move to approve the amendments to the Park and Tree Citizen Advisory Committee bylaws as presented, with the exception of, now I have to get to it, Article 4 relating to membership and the liaison member from the council.
Pat, Councillor Bell,
Yes.
I do believe that that's right, that they struck out that, so I believe what they're doing is removing the counselor from a voting member of that committee. Because the way that the bylaws were originally set, the counselor voted and their vote counted in their quorum count. And so is that not
well, what I'm seeing on page 34, 35 is section 1 membership, and 1 non-voting staff representative referred to as staff. So that would be Brian, appointed by the city administrator, and 1 non-voting council member. And then in red, it says strike and 1 non-voting council member. So I don't think they want the strike in there.
I think that's the point of the liaison position instead of the voting member.
And
We actually don't want counselors to be members of committees. And so that is correct.
The actual track changes. Page 34 is what the Park and Tree Committee had provided Brian and us. So let's go to page 37, which is our actual document down at the bottom, and make sure that that reads how you would like.
So Article 4. Again, what is struck is and 1 non-voting council member. Are they asking that just be totally gone, or do you want, so you don't want a liaison included in that committee?
The liaison isn't covered in the bylaws. The liaison is a council action. And we don't want the committees to have that in their bylaws, that there's a council member in their committee. That should be a council action. So they're striking the fact that a councilor is a member of that committee. They're a non-voting member.
I am then confused when I look at page 128. What are their minutes? So I guess prove the changes as submitted. And you can take that back to them in any way you choose.
Second.
Okay. Good.
Motion by Counselor Bell and a second by Counselor Fox to approve the amendments to the Park Tree Citizen Advisory Committee bylaws as presented. All those in favor, please signify aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It passes unanimously. Good discussion. Administration report. These items are information only, no action required. Any questions?
Mayor, are you referring to the finance report or the whole
Well,
group
we can
of-
start with the financial and go down the list. I'm sorry, my script was pretty basic in the beginning there. We can go to the financial report and look at the financial written report and ask if there's any questions. Counselor Lehman.
Not necessarily the financial report, but it is a financial question. We had talked a couple months ago about renting the building in town that was available. What was the
Oddfellows Hall?
Yes, what was the outcome of that?
We're going to bring that to council for approval next month, so it's a go. Any other questions on financial? Moving to the Citizens Inquiry Quarterly Report. I think there was 3 items. Any questions on that? Councillor McConnell.
I don't know if this is a citizen's inquiry, but we got an email message from someone today. I don't know if that's considered a citizen's inquiry regarding a stop on the freeway. Where does that fall into this?
I talked with Chief Larson, and the city has a process. He has talked with that individual, and if that individual chooses, they can come in and formally file an inquiry or complaint, whatever it may be, with the police department. Obviously,
Okay.
they have their very own process for dealing with any of these issues.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Chief Larson has been in contact with that individual. Any other questions on the citizens inquiry? American Rescue Plan, Ann? You're muted.
You're muted, Ann.
Right. So this is something that we have talked about before, and the information on it is coming out slowly. What we do know is that Coburg will receive approximately a little bit under $240,000. We'll receive half of it sometime between now and July. I'm not really clear on that yet. Most likely, possibly in early June, and then the other part of it in the next fiscal year in the spring. The federal government has provided guidelines for how this money is to be spent, and those guidelines still are being clarified. In addition, the governor came out with her 10-point recovery plan, suggesting areas where the cities should focus. And every city is different and every city has different needs. And I think that's part of the wide parameter for what this money can be used for. So what I tried to do is give the council as much information as I have right now regarding this, and begin the discussion of how this money should be spent. Again, this doesn't have to be decided tonight, but I think the discussion needs to start. And that's highly encouraged by the federal government and the state, that cities need to start planning for this. There's a budget process coming up that we need to include these things in our budget. And there's projects that if we know that there's going to be money put towards them, it makes a big difference in the planning of those projects. I mean, and so I tried to give you some background on a few things that I see as needs in Coburg that come up and that we are working on. And really, honestly, they all rise to the top. There's no one that rises to the top over another. Housing is definitely an issue in the whole country, in the state of Oregon, but in Lane County, it's almost to a desperate issue. And so that is something the city could consider. Economic development, I think that there's a great need for the city to assist in trying to spearhead some form of a summer and continuation of those things that make Coburg special, and also looking at what do our businesses need and are we fulfilling that need. Broadband is a huge conversation that we need to have as a community, and I'm working on that right now. I'm working. There is one provider that has actually leased dark lines to the community and is working on the infrastructure right now to get that turned on. That is being leased through the Fiber Consortium. When it gets to Coburg, then that is high-speed internet, and there will need to be infrastructure done in order to allow for that use. Some of it will be not as complicated as others. And so broadband is definitely an area where a public-private partnership is important. Whether or not we put funding towards it or not, it's going to be important. And emergency response is always important. There are needs in emergency response that the city tries to just kind of tackle that a little bit at a time. And then we've had a lot of talk about the Public Works shop, and that's an infrastructure. I haven't seen clarification as to whether or not a building could be included in that. I've seen a lot of talk about water and wastewater infrastructure, but I'm not sure that a building will qualify, and I need to get an answer to that. But that is a option. So I've tried to include what I know, and of course the counselors may have ideas of their own, but I just wanted to start this conversation and find out where the counselors, how you would like to tackle this conversation.
Well, I agree with the summer season, and of course with the pandemic. I know that Chamber and Grange, who sponsor most of our celebrations, didn't make any revenue because they didn't hold the money-making events for them. So they're hurting. And that to me is a big part of Coburg, having music in the park, having the Antique Festival. And they lost those revenue sources, and they were still paying out money. And so they're hurting. And I think as a community, we want to see those come back again. But they may need some assistance with that. I also like the idea of partnering with the chamber to talk to our businesses and see what kind of ideas come up out of that. You've got some good ideas in here, and I think the ideas are limitless. We just need to focus on ones that are achievable and create the maximum effect for us. Any other questions or statements from councilors? Councilor McConnell. Councilor
This is
McConnell and
a
then
great
Councilor Lehman.
list. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, I muted everything for a while accidentally. And this is a great list. Can we get 250,000 for each of these 5 things that you've got?
I can ask, but the answer might be no.
No, I don't even know where to begin because they all look so, they're all important. So how do we go about determining what we want to focus on? I guess that's my question.
There's an interesting
list them
aspect to
in-
this.
Pardon?
That we have some ongoing communication with different things that are going on that may bump some of these up if we get assistance from them, whether it be developers or other grants or other priorities. So I think we need to carry forward with these, but I think what's going to happen is something else is going to occur that's going to put something on a top priority. I would be surprised if we didn't get further assistance on one of these down the road. And was that all you had, Councilor McConnell?
Yes.
Councilor Lehman.
Well, maybe one strategy would be to list 10 items and give to each counselor, and they could prioritize their list and actually put some dollar signs. And then if we had all of our counselors' sheets in front of us, it might further the discussion and might make it a more efficient discussion. But one I would like to comment on that caught my eye with the solar panels on City Hall or the sewer plant. I think we should have some alternative energy there. And I just wondered whether generators would be more cost effective and efficient with the fueling station.
So the City Hall and the sewer plant both have generators already. We have a transferable on trailer generator for City Hall, and then it can be used in other areas. In addition, City Hall has battery pack that will last 12 hours. So for the first 12 hours, City Hall can run without the generator. Then the generator has to come in and then recharge those batteries. The solar, when we did this work, it was highly recommended that we add solar panels onto City Hall that could keep the batteries charged. That makes the generator on wheels available to other things, such as if we had an emergency tent that we had to set up for the community, that generator could be used for that, or that generator could be towed to an emergency site, a building site. So if we have a partner that's willing to put in the electricity to receive that generator, we could run a community shelter with that generator, even though there might not be electricity. It could also be utilized at the water plant if needed, or the sewer plant. So I think that the solar panels were an idea that we have the generator, but there may be a greater need. And so how could City Hall continue to run and charge the battery pack? So it's one of those projects that we've kind of stepped into one part at a time with a continuous conversation of how do we better this project? How do we get ourselves even more resilient?
So following that up, if we had some dollar figures as ballparks, then the council looks at 10 different items and they have a budget of 240,000 over 2 years. We could kind of prioritize and at least get that out as a matrix to further discussion.
Good idea.
So we could apply suggested dollar amounts to these items and then let the council prioritize them.
And another part of that, Ann, might be if we're able to, like, let's take the solar panels. If we were able to put just enough solar panels to recharge or carry our battery pack for another 12 hours versus we could run City Hall all the time with it. So that you don't have just one price package, you have an option of those. I think that would be helpful too, because I know that was part of our discussion when we initially brought in this battery pack and solar discussion.
I will attempt to get some pricing or some suggested costs on these items, and then pass it, probably bring it to the May meeting. Or what I'll do is I'll pass it to the council and I'll write a report and let you spend some time with it and return it to me in time to report back for the May meeting.
Great. Have you talked at all with the chair of the chamber? President of the chamber?
I have, and I've talked with the treasurer of the chamber. The chamber and the Grange both applied for grant funds to reimburse them for their revenues. The Grange did get reimbursement for some of their lost revenues. The chamber was denied that. And so the chamber is hurting. Seriously hurting. They also had managers of some of their festivals that they were in contract with, so they had to continue to pay their salaries, and then no festival, and then one of the managers actually resigned, and so in order to get the festivals up and running, they're going to have some assistance of some way, or they're just not going to happen. And I think that is the heart of Coburg, and that is what not only brings visitors, but the locals, especially the parties in the park or the music in the park, is part of the heart of Coburg. And so I talked with the treasurer, and she's just, they're hurting and they could use the assistance.
Are they willing to take on a conversation about other options in the city too, that we could look at this?
I'm sure that they're willing to take on any conversation, and the president of the chamber is very engaged.
Okay. I think that's something that would be worthwhile, because they're a good group, obviously, to talk about what Coburg needs.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Or I see Councilor McConnell. Councilor McConnell, you're muted.
I can't talk and chew gum. And did we not have some more funds available from our COVID funds that we gave to, made available for some of the businesses? Did we use all those funds?
We did use all $50,000. There was not just what we gave the businesses, but the city had expenses as well that we were reimbursed for. So there was some staff time that we got reimbursed for, and then that had to do with COVID. And then there was also some electronics requirements for public meetings that we were able to turn in and get reimbursement for.
And how about the community foundation? Do they have any funds available that might go towards the chamber and the other one? Are they able to contribute at all for something like that?
No, I mean, the foundation is really at a very base level of getting off the ground, and they do not have funds at all. I mean, that's what we're trying to work on with Main Streets as well, and work with the foundation. So at this time, that is not an option.
Okay. Thank you.
Counselor Fox.
I love the list, and I mean, especially on being on the ad hoc committee for the development code, I'm intrigued by the innovative housing and Main Street concepts, and how a portion of the money could be used to button up the code once we give it to the committee and or in-kind funding for the expenses to be incurred.
Other questions or comments from counselors? Counselor Lehman.
What is the chamber's annual budget?
You know, Counselor, I'm not prepared to answer that tonight. I could get it for you, but I don't have their financial budget in front of me.
I think it would
Years
be
ago-
important to know what the scope is, just in terms of what kind of funds we would provide them.
Years ago, it was tens of thousands of dollars. All the fees from the antique festival for the booths that they spent advertising, they hired a manager. So it was pretty tight, but I'm pretty sure it was about anything under 40,000, I believe. But again, that was years ago that I saw that. And that was when the antique festival was in the roar. It was big.
And I'm happy to gain that information and provide it as part of this packet that I sent you.
Any other questions? I like the idea, Ann, that you would send that list to us on the Friday report so that we can work on it and get it back to you. I would really like to meet with the chamber, their executive officers, or all of them to get some discussion about this and ideas from them to add to this.
Okay.
And Councillor Alexander.
So investing in Oregon's infrastructure, A, B, and C, are those the only options we can use the money for? Those just ideas?
Infrastructure, so that what I've seen a lot of is broadband, water and sewer infrastructure, wastewater. So I'm assuming that that's what they meant. Broadband is big, and I think that that is, when the mayor was talking about more funds coming available for certain projects, I think that's when you're going to see available funding coming from. But the city, but matches are required on those things. And so I think that the city choosing to elect to use some of the funds as a match towards a project that could become ready in order to go for a much bigger grant would be a great use of the money.
What about for our roads or the bridge that's coming and all the money we need to put into that?
So the bridge is not city. I mean, the city will be applying for funding for the bridge, but it's an ODOT project. So we wouldn't be utilizing it for that. For roads, I would have to check. I am assuming that there is another package coming out for roads. And so it's one of those things that we just need to wait. But the other thing is as councilors, you can certainly reach out to our legislators and be talking to them about the need for funding for roads. So, because those are those important pieces that as they make decisions at the legislature, small cities, they are impacted greatly by their decisions. And so I think it's very important that we are vocal about that. But roads, I haven't seen that, but I can certainly check into it.
Yeah, I guess it would fall under infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments about the American Rescue Plan? Well, Ann, I think you already had enough to work with. We've got a little bit more and a little refinement of where to go from here. Any other questions or statements for you?
Nope. I think
All right.
I think it's a good plan to move forward.
It'll be exciting to see where this does end up, because again, I think we're going to end up piggybacking onto other things. There's so many things coming up. I believe that this is only the beginning. So we need to be prepared. Planning is a big part of this, I think. Okay, we'll move forward to the administrative monthly report. Anything for department heads or Ann?
I have one item to add that's not in the report. I did have a conversation with Ron at Coburg Sanitary Service today. Part of their agreement with the city is that they would provide yard debris cans in May. They have ordered those, and due to COVID, they have been delayed more than once, and they still haven't received them. So Ron wanted me to make sure and share with the council that they're waiting for them. They will get them out as soon as possible, but it's not going to happen in May as they thought it would. They will not be charging extra fees for the yard debris until the cans are at the curb. And so he wanted to make sure that you knew that as well. He's doing his very best, but they have no control of it. This is all part of the manufacturing issues that are happening during COVID. Councillor Fox?
Councillor Fox.
What will be the cost of the pickup of a yard debris can?
Boy, you know what? I'm gonna have to go back and look at that, but I'll get that information to you. It's part of our.
I believe it was an additional $5 a month.
Yeah, I wanted to say 7, but I think it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, somewhere in there. It was, for the service we get, I'm amazed how much service we get for the bill that we have. Councillor Lehman.
Was asked by a neighbor the status of the wheelchair ramp at Johnny Diamond Park.
So the city has been working with the contractor and gave them options. The contractor has elected to totally tear out the ramp and rebuild it. I believe Brian can jump in here if you're still on, Brian, but I believe that would be happening in May. So it's kind of been a bit of a process of discussions on what was the resolution to that. Gary, also legal, has been involved in that discussion.
I see Gary raising his hand.
It's happening next Monday.
Okay, good.
The tear out, pouring either that day or shortly thereafter.
There you go. There's an answer. Councillor Alexander?
Remind me what a pop-up plaza is?
So a pop-up plaza is a plaza that is, it can be moved. So it's meant for events. It's becoming very popular around the country. It can happen, a city can shut down a road temporarily and put a plaza up. It might be for a season. It might be for an event. And that is tables, places for people to sit, garbage cans. A lot of cities are incorporating games. So it's a place for people to gather, to spend time outside. The purpose of it is to get people out into the fresh air and not gathering inside. So it gives options for some normalcy to return. It also has a great economic driver. So the city of Coburg has some great parks, but we don't have a lot of seating for, say, the bikers that will come to the bike hub. We don't have a lot of seating for them. So it provides some tables. And the other part is it provides tables, garbage cans, in which we can also provide signage, which is part of the grant we wrote to drive people to our local restaurants to order takeout and then enjoy it at the plaza. But that's what it's really kind of meant to be, seasonally, possibly moved. And it's in the equipment that the cost is.
Thank you.
It's an interesting aspect that it's a new name to something Coburg has actually been doing for decades. When we closed down for the Antique Festival or Golden Years, we shut down the streets. We have electricity supplied out there with plugins available for vendors and things. But this is the tables, waste cans, signage, things like that is what we're looking at with this grant. And I hope that our committees, especially parks, can look at these plazas and things and really give a bigger picture of how we can make our downtown core and park area work in that plaza idea. So I think there's lots of great ideas out there and some good discussion to come up. Any other questions for the administrator's report? Hearing none, I will note that we have the committee minutes for our committees. And is there any questions or statements regarding our committees? I know we have liaisons. Any great insights or comments? Councilor Fox.
The ad hoc committee is coming along. Slow to start. It's a big project. But people are really invested, and we've had some good meetings. And we had a small meeting at the City Hall the other day. So we actually met and saw each other's faces.
Wow. It's a big subject, but it's a great group of people with some good background and knowledge. So it's a real deep issue that I appreciate the skill and the talent that we have on that committee. So thank you.
Yeah.
Any other committee reports, liaisons? All right. And I'll give you one last opportunity to say anything. You got anything before we close up? You're muted.
Sorry, habit. I sit in so many Zoom meetings and you just get so used to talking and muting immediately. So it's become a real habit. I don't have anything else outside of my city administrator report right now. There's a lot happening in a lot of projects that are just getting started or are in conversation only, and we'll just bring the council along as they happen. So anyway.
Exciting times. Councilor Bell.
Just one question. There is information on Jacob Spores Park here. And I wondered, at one point we had talked about the opportunity to put some sort of lighting, solar lighting, I think was the conversation, actually in the park itself. Where are we on that? Does anyone know?
I think Brian can answer that.
Yeah.
A solar light was installed at the corner there by Jacob Spores Park. So where the loop path heads off, that's where we installed the light.
Right. But is there any plan to put lights like in that structure in the park? I think that's what community members had asked for.
Well, no, they were asking for some sort of lighting around the entrance of the loop path, or a street light in that vicinity is what they were wanting.
All right. Sammy, you got anything? Okay, let's call this a meeting. It's a meeting. 9:07. Thank you, everybody, for your time. We'll see you at the next. Good night.